When was the last time you heard a little voice in your head? Let's explore. I remember watching this Disney movie, Pinocchio, where there's this character, Jiminy Cricket. He kept singing, the character kept singing, "Always let conscience be your guide." Now, this whole song captures a popular image of the word conscience. That let conscience be your guide, that means there's an inner voice that should be guiding us. There is an inner voice that tells us what is the right thing to do or what's the wrong thing to do whenever we are confronted with difficult moral choices. So that means there is a voice inside you that guides you. It's the same thing that UPSC also has in the syllabus, where there's a topic called Conscience as Guide to Action. And today we'll be exploring this topic, Conscience as Guide to Action. So what exactly is conscience? When you look into dictionaries, most dictionaries define conscience as an inner faculty that helps us distinguish between what is right and what is wrong. If you look into most philosophers' works, they consider conscience as an ability to distinguish right from wrong. The bottom line, conscience is an internal advisor. I repeat, internal advisor that tells us, that guides us in matters of right and wrong. What is interesting is there are some philosophers who are a little skeptical about this. In fact, they say, do we have a voice? Can you hear the voice? Whereas there are other bunch of philosophers who will say, yes, we do have that inner sense of right and wrong that guides us. So the problem here is some philosophers consider that conscience is a faint voice which we hear once in a while, whereas other philosophers are very emphatic that yes, there is a voice inside us. Let's keep the whole philosophical debate aside and let's explore from a UPSC perspective, what exactly is conscience? How does conscience guide us? The most important question is, how does conscience guide us? Before we get into understanding how conscience guides us, in what way conscience guides us, let me briefly tell you how conscience develops. Conscience is a process that develops slowly as we grow up. And it all starts with family, society, the world around us, the school, the university. Because as we grow up, we are taught to do one thing very important, and that is what is called labeling actions. We are taught to label some actions good, some actions bad, some actions evil, some actions great. And as a child grows up, a child learns to label these actions. And that's how a child matures. That's how a child learns, oh, what am I doing? Is it right? Is it wrong? And this ability to label actions slowly matures in a child. With more experience, they tend to understand, they tend to reflect over things, reflect over their own actions. And this ability to reflect makes them very evaluative, makes them very self-evaluative. So that's how conscience grows. Now here's the catch. Conscience is very subjective because everybody experiences the world around us a little differently. So that's why when you look at people around us, you'll find two kinds of people. One who are very hyper-aware of the conscience, very hyper-aware. On the other side, you'll have people who are very lax about the conscience. They're quite cool about the conscience, to use your words, cool about the conscience. On the other side, hyper, they're very scrupulous. And these hyper-aware individuals are people who will always think 10 times before you're doing something because they have that heightened sense of conscience. They're super tuned to their conscience, I should say. Super tuned to the conscience. On the other side, we have these lax individuals. But anyway, we are not interested in this lax and hyper-aware. We are more interested in understanding how conscience guides us. Next time, pay attention to your own self. When you're about to do an action, you'll notice there's a voice inside you, that is conscience. It guides you. It guides you by commanding you to do something. It guides you by stopping you, forbidding you from doing something. It guides you by permitting you also. Oh, do it. At the same time, it also advises you also. So these are the four roles, these are the four ways conscience guides you, by commanding, forbidding, advising, at the same time permitting. Let's explore this part. first thing that conscience does to you is it commands you, do it. Next time, just feel yourself. There are some things where you feel, oh, I have to do it. So that's the first way conscience guides you, commanding you to do something. How many times have you felt this? You're about to do something and suddenly there's a voice inside that forbids you. Don't do it. Stop it. Now that's the second rule of conscience. It forbids you from doing something. When you're about to violate something, violate a very big moral rule or violate a social taboo or something like that, it tells you, don't do it. The third way conscience guides you is it permits you some actions. When I say permitting some actions, that means your personal sense of moral values or your personal rules allows you to do those actions. That's a third rule, permitting you. You know, we all have our own rules. We all have our own set of values that we abide by. So this is what is known as permitting rule of conscience. Now comes the last situation. This was advisory rule of conscience. Now this is where conscience tells you, boss, you're about to do this. This is a risk. If it goes wrong, that's what is going to happen. If it goes right, these are the benefits of it. So it advises you. And this is where you have to take a decision. If I do this, what is the risk? Am I willing to take that risk? So this is an advisory role because there's a risk involved. And the risk is you may end up violating your personal sense of moral rules, or you may end up violating a social taboo or something like that. And this is where people with hyper-aware sense of conscience will be very conscious. They'll stop themselves from doing it. They'll not like to take a risk. This is where people with a little lax sense of conscience may take a risk. So advisory rule of conscience. When you're looking at conscience as a guide to action, remember something, that two things you have to keep in mind. First one is this: conscience can only guide your action. And conscience can only evaluate your action. Conscience is not about evaluating others' action. That's the first thing you have to remember. Second thing, you always learn to distinguish between conscience and act of self-criticism. For example, you get a test paper. And when you saw the test paper, you realize that, oh, I could have done this better. Oh, I could have written this answer in this way. That is self-criticism. That is not conscience. Conscience is something else. Conscience comes into play when you're about to violate your personal rule or a personal value or a social norm. So you have to learn to distinguish between these two things. Let's look into importance of conscience. You know, conscience is something very important for us in our lives. Why? Because it does two more things. Besides guiding your actions, it also improves your ethical awareness. One. Second, conscience also improves your decision making. So this is what we will be exploring now, the importance of it. If you look at till now, we looked at guides to action. Now let's look at the importance of it. The first importance of conscience is it improves your ethical awareness. It heightens your ethical awareness. It makes you more aware about your personal moral sense. It makes you more aware about your personal values which are non-negotiable. It makes you aware of your personal rules. There are some rules which we commit ourselves. Oh, talking about rules, let me tell you something. Having rules is good in life. Why? Because rules discipline you. Yes, rules discipline you. Without rules, we'll be indisciplined. So purpose of having rules is to discipline your own self. So conscience makes you aware, oh, this is a rule you have, don't violate it. So it improves your ethical awareness. In medieval times, there was this philosopher Thomas Aquinas. He equated conscience with this ethical awareness. In fact, he used the word synderesis in his writings, and which meant spark of conscience. And we use this spark of conscience or this ethical awareness when we're trying to assess the world around us in moral terms. Oh yes, we do assess the world around us in moral terms. You know, we constantly judge the world around us. And when we judge the world around us, we judge it economically, politically, socially, in every sense. We also do it with a heightened ethical awareness. We also make judgments about the world around us in ethical terms. So your heightened sense of ethical awareness helps you understand the world around you much better. It helps you understand the events that's happening around you much better. You're able to judge the world's events with a moral sense. Besides improving ethical awareness, conscience also helps us a lot in making decisions. You know, a well-informed conscience and a well-formed conscience, I use two phrases, well-informed and well-formed conscience, actually can be quite handy if you're making decisions about different difficult questions in life. So, conscience, by making you very aware of your own values, of your own principles, improves the decision making also. And this is what Aristotle called as practical wisdom. Interesting, right? Practical wisdom. So, in other words, a well-informed, well-formed conscience helps us in our decision making. And at the same time, it also helps you in being more wise in making choices. So from now on, when you're making important decisions of life, listen to your conscience, because it's your wisdom speaking to your own self. Till now, we looked at conscience as a voice, conscience as a guide to action, conscience as a guide to ethical decision making. We explored conscience from these terms. Now, let me just digress a bit. Let me just divert a bit. And in newspapers, oftentimes you come across this word called freedom of conscience. Sometimes you also come across this phrase, prisoner of conscience. So let's explore what these terms mean. When I say freedom of conscience, it refers to autonomy. It refers to freedom of the individual to decide according to his moral sense, his own values and principles, what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad, what is virtuous and what is vicious. So it's a kind of a zone where a person can decide for his own self. That's called freedom of conscience. And later, when human rights as a concept evolved, freedom of conscience became an important right. And it's the same freedom of conscience which a lot of civil disobedience used throughout history. So it refers to that zone of independence, a zone of autonomy, where a person can use their own sense of right and wrong, their own moral sense to take action. That's why it's called freedom of conscience. When I say prisoner of conscience, it refers to those individuals who are very hyper aware of their beliefs. These are people who have stood up for their beliefs. These are people who have not recanted or who have not gone back on their political beliefs. And these are people who have stood up to the repressive regimes. These are people who have refused to give in to repressive regimes because of their ideological leanings or because of the heightened sense of what is right and what is wrong. That's why it's called prisoner of conscience. If you ask me, conscience is like your own personal integrity monitor or honesty monitor. It tells you what you can do, what you cannot do, what is permitted. It advises you. Besides all this, having a clear conscience always helps in life. Because when you perform actions with clear conscience, you don't have the guilt. Oh, believe you me, guilt-free life is the best life. So that's why we always say, listen to your conscience. Be aware how it's guiding you. Use it. Use it. So this is all we have today about conscience. Let me know what you think about conscience in the comments. Before we wrap up today's session on conscience, let me just read out the question that UPSC had about voice of conscience. What do you understand by the term voice of conscience? How do you prepare yourself to heed to the voice of conscience? 2013. If you look at the question, there's a term called voice of conscience. And in today's session, that's what we discussed. And I'm sure you should be able to frame an answer using today's session. And to help matters, I intend to blog an answer on the same question. So watch out for my blog also. And the link for the blog is in the description. Do click on it. So long. Happy learning. Bye.